Well, hello, everyone at All Things Tandy Radioshack. Welcome once again to another interview. This one is pretty exciting. I've had a lot of people that have really wanted this one to come by. We've got someone very special with us today. His name is Mark Siegel. He was, we were just talking earlier. If he wasn't involved, now he's very kind. He's not taking credit for everything, though I think he should. If he wasn't involved in at least something there, he definitely had his touch on a lot of what was going on. So hello, Mark, and welcome to our interviews.
Nice to be here.
Great. So let me start. My first question to you is going to be, what is your first recollection? What's your first memory of coming to Radio Shack? What year, time?
Well, it was February 1982, and I walked in the door and I was basically reporting to a gentleman by the name of Van Chandler. He's the one that basically hired me. Previously, I was with DataSoft, and we had sold Radio Shack some of our products, so he knew about me. And I had left DataSoft because of some financial issues, and he called me up and hired me that same week. So anyway, I got to the office and was put into an office with two other programmers. One of them was an ex-Texas Instruments programmer, and the other one was a programmer from NASA. Those were pretty interesting guys, but I got there and they set me up with a Model 2 and a 4-drive disk bay that they had their cross compiler on for the color computer. And then they came and said, well, we got a problem. Color computers are in real short supply, so we can't get you one. And I'm looking, can you bring yours in? And I said, okay. So I brought mine in, and it was there for like 2 months before I actually got a color computer.
Wow. So your first project when you came on board, do you kind of remember it?
Yeah, they asked me to write a piece of software that allowed them to duplicate color computer disks because they hadn't done any disks yet. And basically they had no way to produce them. So I wrote a little piece of software that formatted the disk, but only those tracks where the software was at, and wrote only those sectors where the software was, so that the thing produced disks as fast as it could.
So would you say
took about 2 days?
So would you say that back around that time, most of what you were doing was programming and coding, not too much architecture?
No, actually, most of what I had done previously was dealt with outside people getting software for DataSoft, and all the programmers that worked inside DataSoft worked for me. So I was kind of envisioning that I would sort of eventually be doing the same thing, and indeed that's what I wound up doing.
Sure, kind of like almost building a programming guild, it sounds like.
Yeah. Towards my end of time in Tandy R&D, which you guys know as Tandy Electronics, I had 3 programmers working for me and probably half a dozen outside vendors doing products for us.
I see. Can you recall what Radio Shack Tandy Corporation was like back in 1982? As far as the buildings and, the offices.
It was the same build. I mean, it was the towers.
So the towers were up by then, yeah.
The towers were up by then. I think it was the 13th floor, but I don't remember. It might have been the 11th at that time, where the software guys were. And right next to me were all the writers of the manuals and such.
So the TRS 80s they were really starting to hit right around that time?
Well, when the color computer had already been out for about a year and a half. The the Z80 machines were kind of headed down, and the industry was just on the cusp of a PC.
So this was prior to the 1000, right around the keynote. I would think that the first project that I can reading about your history, the first project that I'm sure you felt frustrated with would have been the building of the 2000.
Yeah, actually, the Model 100 came to my desk before the 2000 project started.
Well, that came out pretty good, though.
Yeah, that came out good. The first Van Chandler walked in and set the thing on my desk and said, "This is terrible. How can we fix it?" And indeed it was. I mean, there was no way you could even figure out how to use the software in it, much less anything else. So I sat there for about a day and a half and thought about how to do this. And my big vision for it was, well, there's one sort of universal interface and all the applications basically work through that. I wrote this thing up and handed it back to them and never heard a thing about it. And about 3 months later, it finally arrives back on my desk, works almost exactly like I had envisioned it working. And
so you basically you blueprinted the software for that model.
Yeah. And just recently, I found out that Bill Gates himself had actually written the code for that. He was the first thing that got him excited in a long time. So
that's interesting. Your paths almost crossed.
Oh no, I had many discussions with Bill Gates over the years.
You did?
Interesting. Oh yeah. Color computer basics and 1000s and multimedia PCs and all that. I've had lots of dealings with Bill Gates.
That brings up a really good question. Just how much of Bill Gates and his entourage in IBM in Microsoft, I mean, was a part of Radio Shack and what they were doing?
Hard to say, you know. I'm probably the only one that ever called Bill Gates an idiot. We were in a meeting talking about the deluxe color computer basic, and I said something and he said something, and I said, "That is absolutely stupid. What are you, an idiot?" And of course, Bill Gates was nothing at that point. I mean, you know, Microsoft was a fairly small company still.
Right. That's interesting. Well, that brings up another question. I remember now this is a little bit later on, I'm jumping ahead, but it's on the same premise. Sierra Online, Ken and Roberta Williams, I know that they were connected with Radio Shack at one time, and they tried to push a lot of their products because of our graphics. Did you ever work with Ken?
Actually, I knew Ken Williams before I ever went to Tandy Radioshack.
Well, that's interesting. Please tell us.
So, and when CESs came around, we hung out together, and also we had Ken was a good guy. So, you know, I was out to
I've heard that
several times. In fact, I was out to everybody several times over the years. So
they were at one time an integral part of
they weren't integral. It was more like they had some of the best software, and
good point.
We basically said, all right, you know, let's take what you got.
Well, that would make so much sense because you're putting the best software up to, at that point, some of the best graphics and sound. So that would be a great fit, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and they were quite willing to do anything we wanted. In fact, I can say that for pretty much anybody, Activision, Epix, Electronic Arts.
That brings up another good point. Tell me about the interaction with Sound Blaster?
Okay, well, first off, Sim, I think his name was, the guy who started Sound Blaster, came in with the Music Blast. I think it was Music Blaster. It's something that was equivalent to an ad-lib card, just the Yamaha FM chipset on it. And he tried to sell it to us. And they were not in such good financial, and Barry Thompson was the buyer at the time. And I didn't want to buy that product. But what we did want to do is I had already managed to sell the company on putting a DAC in all the 1000s. So in order to get the rest of our line to be able to play DAC, play music software and DAC stuff, so that when we bought stuff from the outside vendors, it could play on all of our product. I got them to go build a new product that included the DAC, and they put MIDI stuff and everything else into it, and that became the Sound Blaster. As it turns out, that guy made $1 billion off of that product. It's literally.
Wow. Well, I heard something about the buyer went ahead and purchased a lot of Sound Blaster parts.
Yeah, that's in order to keep them in business, so we could get the version with the DAC.
Interesting. So Radio Shack at sometimes actually kind of helped a lot of their vendors.
Oh yeah, we did that all. You know, there was a discussion I had with some of the when we finally got software buyers, when I wasn't doing everything, and because I used to negotiate the royalties as well back before, you know, on some of this stuff, and my point to them was, look, you do not want to rob as much money from them as you can. We want them to stay in business. We want them to keep producing product from us. So we want to work with them fairly. And it took me a while to get everybody to understand that, look, you know, we make a lot of money on this, but unless they make a lot of money on this, we're not going to get product from them, and it's not going to be good product.
Smart move. So just how frustrating was it to try to push the 2000 through? Now, you know, I know personally, I that's one of my favorite computers, though it's there isn't much you could do with it other than when we had it in our inventory and it ran our store. How frustrating was that computer for you?
It wasn't necessarily frustrating as much as the people that built it never really sat down and analyzed what a PC was. When the IBM PC first came out, I went out and bought one personally for my home because there was no time at work to do that. But I spent a lot of my personal time figuring out what the machine did, and I did that on most everything. I spent a lot of personal time. And when the first version of it came out and they were sure it was done, and I sat down and started playing with some of the things, I knew were all the secrets of PCs, and it wouldn't do any of them. And I got them to bring in a PC, and got several of the VPs in and started showing them what a PC could do and what a 2000 couldn't do. And you know, it just made them really upset that nobody had sat down and figured out what it was supposed to do.
It was already a little too late. So were you tasked to write any software to get it to?
No, we sent it back to the, we had developed a BIOS group, and they had taken all the notes of all the things that it did, and they went back and put all that software and stuff into it. And then it came back in several weeks. And I sat down with it again and still missing stuff. And we had to do that 2 or 3 times. And then the final gotcha on it. And I remember this day really well because it was my birthday. And I'm sitting in my office and my mother calls me and starts singing on the phone, and John Patterson walks into my office. It's the first time he'd ever walked into my office. And and he's saying, I need you to come up to my office. And I'm got my mother on the line and I don't want to say them. So I say, all right, I'm going to have to get back to you, and hung up the phone. And then went up to his office, and there he was with Scott Cutler, who was the vice president of software development.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know who Scott Cutler is, but he's
I've heard
the
of
guy
him.
who
Yeah.
wrote,
I'm becoming more familiar with the names as we go on.
Anyway, and the big deal was Scott Cutler is how much RAM was going to have to go into the 2000 to be sold. And in order to look like a PC, it really needed at least 128 because you had to put basic in RAM. And Cutler was saying, well, no, we're going to basically page basic off of the floppy drive. And I'm saying, we're going to do what? I said, first off, there is no software to do that. And then I start going through, it's an interpreter and how it works. And it was amazing to me, Scott Cutler, being a PhD in computer engineering, had no idea how this stuff actually worked. So by the time we were finished, Cutler said, all right, I guess we have to put the RAM in. And Patterson was quite happy because that's what he wanted to do to start with, get the product out. Finally went out.
What or maybe you were involved with the hard drive that went as an addition to that 2000. Were you involved in that?
No, there were lots of side projects going on. The only other thing is during the design of the thing, when it came to the video, I wanted certain things in the video. Microsoft wanted certain things in the video. And the engineer who name shall remain.
Oh, come on, you can name drop.
No, I think you know
we're all friends here.
About. Wouldn't do any of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me by looking at the architecture that a lot of that was an afterthought. I mean, the way that the hard drive, I have 3 2000s. I have yet to get one hard drive to work correctly. I finally got the graphics, the color graphics to work on that nice color monitor, which was almost impossible to find, but I have still not been able to get that hard drive to work. It just seems like it's a very unusual design.
Yeah, and I didn't really get involved in the hard drive on that thing. Sorry, I can't give you that information.
Like one day I'll find out who was, so I can have a talk with them. Well, so we move on a little bit further now, and we know that the 2000 was kind of a miss, kind of a big miss. Now we're moving towards and then of course you've got the Cocos on the side, which are selling like hotcakes. But here's where I remember, this is when I managed a store in San Diego, and this is when it was a great time to work with Radio Shack. The 1000s came on board. Can you tell me what is your first thought of the first 1000 you saw, and what was your involvement with it?
Well, the 1000 sort of came out of color computer technology.
Interesting.
I had convinced them to go build the Coco 3, and the way we did it is it allowed R&D to go experiment with how to do custom chips. that's what wound up in the 1000. So had there not been a Coco 3, there never would have been a 1000.
I had no idea. I know that when the 1000 first came out, the first one, the actual 1000 itself, there was right away they had to revamp it with the 1000 Model A because there were some problems. Do you recall any of those problems?
Yeah, I think that the only thing I remember about that is they had a power supply that bricked all the time. And I think the way that got solved is it had to get a load put on it in order to start up. So then I'm sure there were some other stuff. I guess the only big thing I remember with the 1000 is when we built the version with the Tandy graphics and the Hercules monochrome graphics in it. They basically got the unit in and they had produced them all, and then they found there was a bug in the Hercules graphic. And they had already produced hundreds of thousands of these, and it was already in the catalog as being able to do this. And their only solution was to bundle an additional video card with it.
Wow.
And those were over $100 a piece.
Oh yeah, parts from back then. I do remember.
So I said, well, let me look at it. I'll come up with a solution for it. And I did. I found a set of conditions that during that bug happened that they could go put on the heartbeat interrupt and go look at those things, and it fixed the problem. And that saved the company just enormous amounts of money.
Oh, interesting.
And all I got out of it was a pen.
Well, I remember the most interesting thing that I remember about the 1000 was when they came out with the third model of the 1000. They had the 1000, the 1000A, and then they had the 1000 HD. I never saw a hard drive setup like that actually went into that 1000 bay. They never did it again, a full height bay. Were you involved in that architecture?
No, those were decisions mostly made by the guys who made the cases for those machines.
I think it was a 10 megabyte. I cannot remember. I don't think it was a Mitsumi, but I just know that it was a very fragile hard drive, and most of them broke, and we upgraded them to the Seagate 20 megs.
Yeah, well, those were days when the choice of components you had weren't a whole lot. And remember, it was Radioshack, so they had to be able to produce a lot of them. So there were only a few companies able to produce enough product that we could buy from them. And let me say, I also remember we bought a bunch of Seagates that sat in the warehouse for a little while longer and wouldn't start up. And so yeah, there were a lot of issues back then with building product.
There was a short span between the time the 2000 came out and the 1000s came out. And there was this computer that looked very similar to an IBM PC, the 1200. You remember that one?
I remember that. That was actually bought as a business machine. Because we basically had sort of two imaginary groups in the thing. We had consumer product and we had business product. And the way it wound up being is business product costs us 80%, in return 20%. Consumer products cost us 20% and can returned 80% of the computer profit. So everybody was always wondering why we were doing business product, but apparently you had to.
So that 1200, as far as you have to excuse me, I have a opened IP address to some of my close friends because I don't want to share it. So they're shooting me some questions.
Okay.
And that one question was just shot about the 1200, which I completely even forgot about because I don't even think Radio Shack did much to construct that. Wasn't that?
No, that was bought. That was bought entirely from somebody else. We
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Basically made sure that it would pass the QC folks.
I see. So now we're moving a little further. We got past the 2000, the 1200. We're in past the 1000s. Now we're getting into the stage where I couldn't keep these computers on our shelves. That's the EXs, the HXs, the SX, and the TX. What was your involvement in those computers?
By then I was mostly over in Radio Shack engineering and basically just doing specifications for what we needed and reviewing and making sure that they did what we asked them to do.
So were you still involved in the purchasing?
I was involved in, as I say, pretty much everything, but at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
Those machines basically that was a time when everybody kind of knew where we would have to be on the next machine, price wise, RAM wise. Those machines were not really revolutionary; they were evolutionary, and everybody kind of knew what that evolution was. I just needed to make sure that it had everything we needed to get all the companies that we dealt with outside to write software to go along with those machines. So basically, once we got past the 1000s without the DAC into the 1000s with the DAC, everything else was just a cost reduction and increase in basically what the unit was to compete with everybody else in the market.
Would you say that you were involved in the architecture to the early machines, the Cocos and the early 1000s?
Oh yeah, when I came in to the company, the Coco 2 was just hitting the market. I actually specified and everything on the Coco 3 and talked everybody into doing it. The deluxe computer as well, which never made it to market because Motorola couldn't produce enough chips. And that was a real shame because that was a really nice little computer.
There was something else, another project that you were involved in that didn't fly, which I wish I would have, because it would have been years ahead, and that's text to speech.
Yeah, that I had basically had a group that was Microsoft, Texas Instruments, First Byte, everybody that was in the text to speech business. We all met about once every 2 months, looking to put that technology into every computer. Unfortunately, there were a bunch of changes in the industry, and it never happened.
So, speaking of what didn't happen, I was surprised to read that Western Digital was not only involved in hard drives and hard drive controllers, but at one time they were involved in graphics cards.
Oh yeah, and in fact, we bought their graphics chips and put them in some of our computers. They and Chips and Technology and a couple of others were the first people doing 16-bit graphics.
First, that was right. That's probably what launched VGA shortly after that.
Yeah, and in fact, that was the first VGAs.
Wow.
Were 16-bit graphic cards. I had also been dealing with trying to push them into doing stuff with OpenGL, which was the first 3D stuff.
Right.
And we had started doing that, but kind of took backseat to some of the other stuff. So that wasn't till way later.
Some of the other stuff right around that time, I would think that there would be hints of CD-ROM.
CD-ROMs, yeah. The CD-ROM issue wound up being one that the only CD-ROM on the market were these big, expensive SCSI drives with the
I have a few.
with the cartridges that you put the CD-ROM in. They were very expensive, and we're getting pushback from all the major software vendors like Sierra Online and Electronic Arts and Activision and all, that they're doing software that uses more than one floppy, and it's costing and they can't produce that. So the industry is growing really, really fast at that point. So we said, all right, let's see what we can do to build an inexpensive CD-ROM drive. And we made a deal with Mitsumi. They had a drive that basically the whole drive kind of pushed out like a tray and pushed in. That was the first Mitsumi drive. They sent it to us and it barely worked. It couldn't do much of anything. So I kind of had a plan. They sent over 3 of their engineers. Microsoft sent an engineer, and we sat down and I explained that how we were going to use the DMA channels to stream data off of it into a real-time buffer. And it took us about a week and a half to 2 weeks to get that to run. And the thing actually performed better than those SCSI drives after doing that. And the drive was like 1/10 the price.
Interesting.
And those were the first drives.
So then I would have to think that this is right around the time that MPC is starting to come out to play.
Well, here's the deal. We now had a Sound Blaster with a DAC. I had a working CD-ROM, and we had some of the first 16-bit color cards. And I wrote up a proposal for a machine that integrated all this. And being that the Color Computer 3 ran level 2 OS 9, I had a good relationship with Microware. Well, Microware were the people that did the Green Book CDI Interactive for Sony and Philips. And they had sent me the spec for Green Book. And I went through that thing and said, well, yeah, this has some nice ideas, but this is not a computer. This is kind of a player product. And so I took some of those ideas and stuck it in my specification and went up and presented it to merchandising, and they took it up to Pell and Roach, and they said, yeah, we're interested in doing this. At that point, we got it sent over to Microsoft for them to look at because we wanted all this to run under Windows.
You mentioned Helen Roach. So was she an intricate part of decision making after, of course,
Bernie Appel? Yeah, Bernie Appel. There was nothing that went on at Radio Shack that Bernie Appel wasn't involved in. He was the president.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would think so. So if that were the case, was he pretty gung-ho with a lot of the projects that you were working with? Or was it frustrating to get him to sign off?
I knew Bernie Appel outside the company as well. So if my name was kind of assigned to it, he didn't look that carefully at it.
Ah,
So we basically, and of course, my boss, Mike Grubbs, the director of that department, also had a lot of influence in getting stuff done. So we got that sent over to Microsoft, and about 3 weeks later, Microsoft sends over this specification that I guess was 2,000 pages of the MPC. And apparently they like the idea.
I would think so. 2,000 pages.
And at that point, among my other duties, I was made the project manager for the MPC for Tandy Radioshack, and I went out and went through the spec with them for several months. And then the spec was presented to Tandy Electronics to go build a computer.
So I would think that it seems to me like you have all the elements of next to the 2000, my most favorite computer. You have MPC, you have CD-ROM, you have sound, you have VGA, you have all these great components, and I'm talking about the Sensation.
Yeah, well, I think we need to take a step back earlier than the Sensation, because there was an MPC that was earlier than that.
What was that one?
I forget the model number. The Sensation was sort of at the end of the MPC specification. But one of the things that was a big issue was the first MPCs were 286s. And I sat down one day and did all the math and said, well, this isn't going to work. There's not enough bandwidth on the bus for all this stuff to happen. And so I got together with R&D and the buyer and all, and went through my numbers and said, well, you know, there is a way around this. We can't use an 8-bit interface card. We're going to have to build a 16-bit card so that the CD-ROM actually sent out 2 bytes at a time to the bus. That gave the bus twice as much time to be able to process the thing. Because, I mean, you got to do sound and you got to move graphics on the screen, and, you know, and you know, it's not like today where we have all these DMA subsystems, right, and everything else. These were slow machines comparably.
Of course. You know, since you said that, I was thinking, because I have every 1,000 I sold when I worked at Radio Shack, probably 30 different computers. And I have this little museum that I take to different schools in their auditoriums, and I show them to the children, and they get a big kick out of them. So I'm pretty familiar with all the machines, and I'm trying to think, and I think the one you're talking about might have been the RSX. Was a 286 machine, and it's so similar in architecture to the Sensation.
I forget what machine.
I bet that's the one you're talking about, because it will do MPC.
Yeah.
And it comes with a CD-ROM. Well, you added it on extra.
Well, I mean, it should come with the little the older
single tray Mitsumi.
Yeah.
Yeah, it came with that. Well, you could get that as an option, and it did work, but it did have some problems, like it won't play the San Diego Zoo correctly, but that's because of the CD-ROM is so inadequate. But it was because,
well, I mean, that you know, it's like everything else. You build the first one, and then you go back and say, all right, what do we need to do to make this better? And
that is very interesting, because that, you know, when you mentioned that, I had no idea there was an earlier MPC, and now that you bring it up, that would have to be the RSX. It was in the RL line of computers. There was, I think, 3 or 4 different models in the RL, and the last one was the RSX, which was a pretty heavily loaded 286.
The thing with the Sensation was the addition of the modem with the DTMF stuff
Oh,
in it.
right. And that was built into the board. I mean, well, at least to
Well,
plug it.
yeah, that was a interesting problem all in itself. I mean, we had the thing running. We had newer CD-ROMs by then that were a little bit better. We had some of our own custom hardware, and of course, I think that was what, a 486.
Well, on the 486 models, you were involved in those too?
Yeah. The problem with the Sensation modem was they got everything to work, but they couldn't get the fax stuff to work. So again, we had a meeting over that, and I made a suggestion of how to fix that. They did fix it. I don't know whether they actually used what I told them, but I don't know if you know anything about DTMF, but there's 3 rows and 4 columns. I mean, 3 rows and 4 rows and 3 columns for decoding the buttons on a phone, and there's 2 sets of tones that get merged together, and you use a filter for a low pass filter to read one set of tones and a high pass filter to read the other set of tones. And based on what those tones are, you have your XY for the button. And that's how the technology works. Well, they needed to be able to, on top of that, handle a fax tone. And here they are, they can handle the DTMF tones, but a fax tone's completely different. And they didn't know how to do that. So my suggestion to them was, since we actually have one more slot, let's stick the fax tone there. And if you get a tone in on one column that doesn't exist now and know then you've determined a fax. And they went back, and I don't know whether they did that or they did something else, but they solved the problem, and the Sensation was a good computer. My only issue with the Sensation is that it was kind of at the end of Tandy Electronics.
That's
being
true.
sold to off, and everybody else in the industry,
AST, I think.
yeah, was starting to build MPCs. The one thing that is interesting about the MPCs, I told you we got the spec from Microsoft, and we started building the product, and we were going to have this big introduction. I think it was in New York, and we all went there thinking that we're going to see this big sign of Microsoft and Tandy introducing the MPC, and we got into the room, and there was a big sign there, but on top of Radioshack, Tandy, and Microsoft, there was IBM. And I got to tell you, everybody was really, really pissed.
Wow.
Because we started this thing. Apparently, Microsoft didn't just send us the spec, they sent it to IBM. And IBM actually never really built one. They were just there to take credit for it.
Oh, that must have been really hard to take.
Oh, yeah. Everybody was really upset about that.
Well, besides the computer aspect of what you were doing, there was also something else that was very, very powerful at that time. And I found out that you have a ham, or at that time you had a ham radio license.
Yep.
So were you involved in a lot of the CBs that were going on at that time?
Well, Radioshack had its own ham radio club back in the early days. When we finally got to when Tandy finally made the decision that we weren't going to be doing custom computer products anymore, they closed down all the computer groups, and there was still a group that did all the consumer electronics, and those guys had been there forever, and there were really good guys, but they canned them all, and they moved all the computer people into those positions, and so I wound up over in consumer electronics products, and because I was one of the few people that had a license and knew RF engineering, I wound up doing all the amateur radio, business band, and CB products along
Wow,
with some
so
of the
you
other
were really
stuff.
involved.
Yeah, all those products were under my jurisdiction.
So what were you think? What was going through your mind when I mean, it's hard for me to fathom the amount of CB radios that were moving through Radio Shack at that time. Everywhere you turned around, we sold probably, 5 to 6 a day.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, there was more time spent on antennas than there were on the radios themselves.
That's true. We did move a lot of antennas, and we had some really nice ones.
Yeah.
Those big ones with the kind of like they went out in all different areas.
And we I actually had to go test antennas to see if they were worth buying. And we also had our own rooms that basically were RF quiet rooms to test stuff out to see if there were any noise coming out of them that would have made them illegal. I think one of the funniest products I dealt with is there was an amplifier for the ham product that had to have a dead zone for CB radios because you weren't allowed to transmit more than 5 watts. So if you hook this up to a CB radio, you could get you could get 30 or 40 watts out of it. So it actually had to have a dead spot in it. And it was being made by a company in Korea. And God, I can't tell you how many times I sent telexes over to Korea trying to explain this problem to them. And every time we got one, still didn't have the dead spot in it. I finally got that resolved, but that was always an issue, is dealing with companies outside the US. I think my favorite story, do you remember the product, the WP2? It was like a later 100. It was kind of thin.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
It was a portable word processor.
Right.
And
reporters love them.
Yeah. And basically we were working with the company, the software company that was writing the software for the hardware was called Something Good. That was the name of the company. It wasn't
ingenious.
Ingenious. Anyway, it had a little scheduling app in it, and I telex back that this is wrong. It goes from 0 to 1200, and there is no 0 on a clock. And they kept coming back and said, no, 0 o'clock. And I kept saying, no, there is no 0 o'clock. And they finally actually had to send an engineer over who sat down with me, and I grabbed his arm, pointed to his watch, and said, where's 0 o'clock? I was looking at this. Oh, no 0 o'clock. Oh, guess what the company was?
Who?
Citizen Watch Company built.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, it's interesting because I'll tell you, I wish we had more time, but we've ran through that hour real quick. But I wonder, my last question to you is probably the one that would carry the most weight. What was it like to work with people like Dr. John Patterson, Bill Wilson, John Pickett, even Mark Clotter, all these great scientific type minds, and to be in the same room with these people. I mean, did it ever get to you in your thought process, boy, we could just design and build anything? What was it like to work with those people?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say I had that view of it because I was kind of always the smartest guy in the room, so I didn't quite see them that way. But I did enjoy them. That they were smart enough so that you could explain something to them and they would understand it and they would go along with it and say, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's really what you want to do with people is you don't want people that you can't use real logical arguments to get them to make their decisions. They just go off. There were a few people at Tandy like that, but they were never put in management positions. Everybody that was in a management position was a pretty intelligent guy, huh?
Really?
Yeah.
So I would think then we're at this point, we come to the end of your time there. Were you involved or around when Tandy Radioshack itself was starting to decline?
Yeah, when they had made the decision that they were going to basically take only off the shelf product and do nothing to it, just put it through QC to make sure it worked and put it on the shelf, and they didn't need the consumer group anymore. I was probably one of the first people they let go because I had the largest salary. And I guess within a month of that, everybody had gone. So Tandy no longer did anything.
I think not too much after that, the first BK came and you could see the handwriting on the wall. But would you agree, looking back at it now, that at one time, the Tandy Corporation itself had probably some of the best engineers in the world?
Oh, yeah. There's no question that we put out groundbreaking product. And unfortunately, Tandy kind of had this philosophy is we don't want to build anything that's going to last forever because we need somebody to go buy the next one in a couple of years down the line. So
I don't know. Their speakers seem to, I still have some that are like probably 30, 40 years old. They still work great.
There's some good stuff there, but
and their computers, my gosh, I got a whole bunch of them that still run.
And I got to tell you, there was always this philosophy that we would only have 50% of the product manufactured internally. The rest of it was bought from other companies. And when we started in the early days of getting Chinese stuff, it was the worst stuff you can imagine.
Oh, I could imagine. I'm sure that there was a lot of problems all the way around the board. Well, Mark, I want to close with thanking you for taking the time to talk with me. This one was really interesting because you opened the door to things I never even knew happened, and it just reassures me how great I know of a history-packed adventure Tandy Corporation was, and to be a part of it at whatever level. I started as a salesman and then moved up to management at a store, nothing bigger than that. But to meet you people and to listen to all the things that you've been through, I am honored to, like I've said to Mark and to Paul, I'm honored that you take the time to talk to us. I'm glad that we have something now in history that won't ever go away, because people need to remember just how good you were.
Well, thank you. But I never regretted moving to over and working for Tandy, because it was a chance to build stuff that actually I wanted to have my own. And
isn't that a fact?
Yep.
Just about everything that I sold, but as I was selling, I was like, dang, I want that. I agree. Well, again, thank you, Mark, for taking the time. And I hopefully we can maybe do another one of these. We'll get a little more in depth. We'll talk about some other things. But
Okay.
again, it's been wonderful. I want you to know that I personally am grateful that you took the time to share your thoughts on your time with Radio Shack and Tandy Corporation.
Pleasure to do so.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
See you guys.